Boker Tov, Erev Shabbat Shalom, Rechavia Nachlaot in Yerushalayim. Thank you so much for joining us today as we have a special version of the Kabbalah Café of Parshat Noach. You know, the Torah tells us often we have to speak nicely. We have to have a clean language. It's not only about Lashon Hara and not telling about someone else, but simply to say nice words. And unfortunately, we're in a society when many people feel free not only to do what they want, but also to say what they want. And often people think, big deal. So I said what I said. Did I change anything? The answer is yes. We have a power to create energy with our words. And therefore, we have to be very careful with what we say. The Talmud in Tractate Psachim, right in the beginning, in the second page, which is Daf Gimel, Amud Aleph, the Talmud tells us something interesting about this subject, that we should always be careful to speak nice words. How do we know that? From this week's Parsha, believe it or not. It says that Noach brought into the ark, kosher animals and non-kosher animals. So when the Torah says that he brought in non-kosher animals, it says, "Umin habehema asher einena tahora," which is not pure. And the Torah could have simply said, "Behema tmeya," an impure animal. For example, when the Torah tells us which animals we're allowed to eat and which animals we're not allowed to eat, in Parshat Shmini and other places, then the Torah says clearly, Behema Tmeya, an impure animal. But over here, the Torah chooses to say, Behema Asher Einena Tahora. So let's count the amount of letters. We have. Thank you, Mendel, for the tea. Now I feel a little more as like it's Kabbalah Café. It's more like a cafe now. But I'm sure all of you have your coffee next to you and your little sandwich or mezonot. Thank you so much. Okay. As we were saying before, Bakasha, let's go. As we were saying before, let's count the amount of letters. If the Torah would have said Behema Tmeya, so Tmeya is Tet, Mem, Aleph, Hey. So those are 4 letters. Now let's count Asher Einena Tahora. I'm pretty sure it's spelled like this. Asher is Aleph, Shin, Reish, that's 3. Einena is Aleph, Yud, Nun, Nun, Hey, is 5. 3 plus 5 is 8. And Tahora is Tet, Hey, Reish, Hey. It could be spelled with a Vav, but I'm pretty sure over here that it's spelled without a Vav. That's 4 letters. So there are an additional 8 letters that the Torah writes. Why? In order not to say a foul language. In order not to say a bad word of time'ah. To establish that someone is tameh. That someone is impure. Even an animal. So from here, in Torah, every single word, every letter, every iota, every vowel is exact. So why would the Torah go such an extra mile or 8 miles and write 8 extra letters? It's all worth it. Quote unquote extra, not extra, they're quote unquote extra, seemingly extra. So it's all worth it for what? In order to establish that we have to speak nicely. We have to say nice words. And we're not allowed to say foul language.
Rabbi, sorry, you've been muted.
Thank you for telling me. So here's a question that I want to ask. But before I ask the question, I want that Odeli, that is getting ready for Shabbos. Odeli, please say hello to everybody. Say shalom. Very nice. And soon we're also preparing for Shabbos. And we're having we're having a special learning for Erev Shabbos. And so the obvious question that can arise now is as follows. We just mentioned a few minutes ago that in several other places in the Torah does say the word tameh. Tameh, which means impure. The Torah does say this, I'm going to call it three-letter word, tameh, tet mem aleph, or four-letter word, or the tet word, tet mem, the four-letter tet word, tet mem aleph hey, tameya. The Torah does use these words in other places. For example, when the Torah wants to tell us which animals are kosher to eat and which animals are non-kosher to eat. So why over here does the Torah choose to write these 8 extra letters in order to prove a point? If you're going to tell me that the word impure, tameh, is not a good word, so don't use it in the Torah. Torah is too holy. And if you're going to tell me that it's okay in other places, so over here by Noach, let the Torah say these words, this word of tameh, and you'll save 8 extra letters. The explanation is as follows. It depends where we have the word tameh. We have a rule in halacha, in deciding a verdict in the Jewish court. If you have to say a message, if you're trying to get a message across, to give a message across, and the only way to say it is obviously by saying exactly the scenario, then you have to say it. There's a very good reason for saying it. Because if you wouldn't say it, it could be misunderstood by others. I'll give you an example. The Rambam talks about fasting. The real fasting days are days when there's, God forbid, no rain. There's actually, we just started asking for rain, mentioning rain and Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, about a week and a half, wow, time flies when you're having fun. It's almost 2 weeks ago. And tomorrow night, Zayin Cheshvan, is the day that we start saying V'tein talu matar levracha. I believe it's the 8th or 9th bracha in the Shmona Esrei for the winter. We start asking for rain. In fact, tomorrow night, according to the forecast, in Yerushalayim across Israel, it's supposed to be thunderstorms, and it's supposed to be Bezrat Hashem, a lot of rain. Before I moved here to Israel, I used to hate rain. But now, wow, it's amazing to see every drop, how much life it gives to Eretz Yisrael, water, plants, and we look very, very forward for having rain. And so, when is there a fast? If you look at the Rambam, you look at the Mishnah, Ta'anit, the main idea of a fast, it's also the fast days that we have, Ta'anit Esther, Asar B'Tevet, Yom Kippur, so on and so forth. But the main idea of a fast is, God forbid, when there's no rain, then the Beit Din has to establish a fast day. And everyone fasts and davens to Hashem and prays to Hashem that Hashem should bring rain to Eretz Yisrael. So in the Rambam, before you start, we do the 3 chapters a day, or the 1 chapter a day, or the mitzvah of the day. So if you look at the actual Yad HaChazakah, in the introduction to the first chapter, in any set of halachot, in 5 or 6 words, you have the mitzvah itself. It's almost like a cut and paste, from the Sefer HaMitzvot. So, in the introduction to the laws of fasting, Hilchot Ta'anit, the Rambam writes that you have to fast al kol tzara, for any danger, shetavo al hatzibur, that would come for the community. That's what you have to fast. Then when you start learning in the Rambam itself, I believe it's in the halachot itself, so he writes a similar expression, but almost with alluding to something, not saying it clearly. When do you have to fast? Al kol tzara, on any any trouble, shalot tova ala tzibur, which will not come on the tzibur. In other words, it means to say that it will come. It's called lashon saginar, using an opposite expression, not to say the words that there will be, God forbid, a tzara, a trouble for Am Yisrael. But in the beginning, in the introduction, it said it clearly, al kol tzara shetava ala tzibur. Why? Because when you're trying to bring a halacha across, the mitzvah, the bare minimum, the exact mitzvah, you have to tell us exactly what it's about. You can't beat around the bush. You have to say it clearly. When it comes to explaining it and elaborating on it, then you can speak a little bit in riddles, because once you've already established what the mitzvah itself is. And the same thing is in our case. When the Torah tells us which animals you are allowed to eat and which animals you're not allowed to eat, it has to say clearly. Behema kshera, tahora, pure, or behema tmeya, an animal which is impure. But over here, the Torah is just telling us which animals Noach brought into the teva and how many of each. So over here, it's not so important to tell us that it was a behema tmeya. It's okay to speak a bit in riddles. Behema asher einena tahora, an animal which is not pure. It reminds me of a story of someone that came by the Rebbe for dollars, and he told the Rebbe that he's going to the Far East. He's traveling soon to the Far East. So the Rebbe, in a flash, the Rebbe corrected him and said, "The East, that's not close." Now, you can say, come on, we're just talking about a place in the world. But the moment that we say far, you're pushing someone away. You're pushing part of the world away. You're already establishing something. You're already establishing that the person is not connected. In other organizations, other quote-unquote kiruv organizations, they call it kiruv. Kiruv rechokim, bringing far people close. In Chabad, you'll almost not hear those words at all. Why? What's so bad about it? It's not bad. It's just that, who am I to establish that someone else is far, and I'm the big shot that's going to bring them close? We have to be very careful how we will label people. And we're not allowed to label someone that this person is close, this person is far. Everyone is close. And we're going to bring them closer. But God forbid to say that someone is far. And so the way we speak is extremely important. The words that come out of our mouths need to be calculated. And having experienced, Baruch Hashem, over the past almost year and a half, a diet, and I think the most important part of the diet is not a diet itself, but to keep it up, is thinking 3, 4, 10, 15 times before you put something in your mouth. And for me, it's a very real thing to think about what comes out of your mouth. Just like it's a challenge and an effort, sometimes a big effort, not to put certain things into your mouth, so too, we have to think about what comes out of our mouths. Because things that come out of our mouths, as we said in the beginning, one can easily brush off and say, it's just a word. It's just a sentence. Someone that ridicules other people, who cares? I just said something. Sometimes one that offends someone with their mouths can offend them much deeper than hitting a person. I'm not advocating, God forbid, in any way being physical. I'm just saying that on the scale of how much you can hurt someone, we have no idea how deep a person could be offended from even one word, or sometimes even without saying anything. Just sometimes people imagine what could be, how much more. So if you say something that can really hurt a person. So we have to be extra careful to show people that we care about them. And just like when you say something negative, you can hurt someone deeply, so too how much more, so many times more. If you say something good to a person, you can really touch them very, very deeply. You can make a huge difference in their lives just by picking up the phone and calling someone and just to see how you're doing. What? People, it's amazing. I hear this all the time. But what do you need? I'm just calling to say hello. What? Why would you? It's such a foreign, strange concept that people, it doesn't even make sense. And so this is something which we should take upon ourselves, that we should always be careful. We learn from the Torah how to speak. And you want to know something? From this week's Parsha, we also know how to look at another person, how to view another person, because it's pretty much connected to the same thing. And I believe it's in the same part of the Talmud. I'll tell you in a second. It's not in the same part of the Talmud, but it's also part of this parsha. It says that after Noach got drunk, he ate from the vineyard, from the grapes, and he got drunk. And unfortunately, he was not dressed. And so Cham saw his father. But Shem and Yefet, they picked up a blanket, and their faces were turned aside, and they held the blanket, the sheet, and they covered their father respectfully. So the Torah says, interestingly, a double expression. The first expression is ufnehem achoranit, and their faces were turned to the back. And then it says ve'ervat avihem lo ra'u, and the private part of their father they did not see. So the obvious question is, that's superfluous. Obviously, if their heads were turned aside, then they did not see what they were not supposed to look at. Why would the Torah say it again? Once again, we have several extra words, extra letters. The Torah does not say anything extra. Everything is exact. And the explanation is that the Baal Shem Tov says that everything that we see is a mirror for ourselves. If we see something good in someone else, then that is a good sign for ourselves. And if we see something negative in someone else, then that is a sign that we need to look at ourselves and fix ourselves first. So therefore, we have to try hard to look at someone else with a good vision. When Shem and Yefet did not see their father naked, it's not just a technical thing that they turned their heads. That's the first part. Ufnehem achoranit. Their heads, their faces were turned around, backwards, aside. But when the Torah continues to say, ve'ervat avihem lo ra'u, that they did not see the nakedness of their father, that doesn't mean the technical part they didn't see. That's obvious. That we know already from the first two words, ufnehem achoranit. What is the Torah telling us? Lo ra'u. Not their eyes, their mind, their heart. They weren't interested. They weren't focused at all on the nakedness of their father. They didn't view their father in a negative way. That was their approach. It wasn't only that they turned their heads around technically not to see their father in that situation, but they could not imagine that their father was doing something which was inappropriate or was in a state that was inappropriate. As far as they were concerned, their father, they were helping their father, and their father didn't have really any connection to such a conduct. And therefore, the message is for us that it's all about how we view someone else. We can always we can change your glasses. You can either have positive glasses or negative glasses, God forbid. You can choose to look at another person, another Jew, with a positive eye, and not to imagine even that the person can be related to any misconduct, or we can be negative people, God forbid. And wherever we look, we find problems and we find negativity. Bikoret. If someone can help me with that word, I'm missing that word. There are some people that are always. If you have that word, please either say it or type it into the comments. But if we look less down other people's throats and to judge and judging people less.
It's checking out.
Okay, thank you. Checking out or looking out for negativity amongst other people. But l'chatchila, to begin with, we need to view people in a positive way, not even to recognize the negativity that they might have. So in summary of today's Kabbalah Café, we learned about the importance of everything that comes out of our mouths, that we should think sometimes, a few times, several times before a certain word or something negative comes out of our mouths. And also, it's not only that, but it's also how we view someone else. We learned from Shem and Yefet how we're supposed to view everyone, including people obviously that are close to us and people that we have never met. Thank you so much for joining us. The big announcement for today is that Tuesday night we have a special edition of the Chassidus in English, where we have a lecture from our very own Chanoch Rubel, who has put together a great essay, an original essay based on the teachings of Kabbalah and building the hay. Raya, can you please remind me the exact title of the lecture?
Second, Rabbi.
Sure, take your time.
Growing a wiser heart.
I'm sorry? Growing
a wiser heart.
Growing a wiser heart, building the hay. The hay is such a central concept in Kabbalah, and he also has a new idea of how the hay can be turned over upside down, and that's a negative thing. And the proper hay, it's an amazing teaching, and so hopefully you'll be able to join us Tuesday night at 7:30. Whoever can come on Shabbos, that'll be wonderful, tonight and tomorrow, and tomorrow evening. And next week, Motzai Shabbat at 7 o'clock, we're going to have our annual Kiddush Levana. It will be Bezrat Hashem live and also on Zoom and Facebook Live. Be well. Have a great Shabbat. Thank you so much for joining us.